Hello friends, I am Dr. Iram Khan from CIT NCERT. Today we will start the topic of sexual reproduction in flowering plants under the unit Reproduction. We have divided this chapter in 4 parts. In the first part, we will discuss about flower as a reproductive structure of angiosperms, the male and female parts of the flower, the structure and development of microsporangia and the pollen grain. The second part will cover the structure and development of the megasporangium or the ovule and the embryo sac along with its types. The third part will give the detailed account of pollination, its kinds, pollen-pistil interaction and artificial hybridization. The fourth part will comprise of double fertilization and post-fertilization structures and events like endosperm and embryo development, formation of seeds in the fruits, parthenocarpic fruits and the process of apomixis and polyembryony. So first we will discuss about flower, which is a fascinating organ of sexual reproduction in angiosperms. The process of producing new individuals by the fusion of male and female gametes is called sexual reproduction. It is supposed to be an advanced stage in the life history of a plant. Gametes are the sex cells which are formed within a flower. The myriads of flowers that we enjoy gazing at, the scents and the perfumes that we swoon over, the rich colors that attract us are all there as an aid to sexual reproduction. All flowering plants show sexual reproduction. A look at the diversity of structures of the inflorescences, flowers and the floral parts show an amazing range of adaptations to ensure formation of the end products of sexual reproduction, the fruits and the seeds. Human beings have got an intimate relationship with flowers since time immemorial. Flowers are objects of aesthetic, ornamental, social, religious and cultural values. They have always been used as symbols for conveying important human feelings such as love, affection, happiness, grief, etc. I would like to mention here floriculture or flower farming. It is a discipline of horticulture concerned with the cultivation of flowering and ornamental plants for gardens and for floristry comprising the floral industry. The development via plant breeding of new varieties is a major occupation of floriculturists. Biologically, flowers are morphological and embryological marvels and the sites of sexual reproduction. Let us see the parts of a typical flower. The petals and sepals are the vegetative parts of a flower, while the two parts in a flower in which the two most important units of sexual reproduction develop are the androecium and the gynoecium. The androecium consists of a whorl of stamens consisting the male reproductive organ, and the gynoecium consists of pistil which represents the female reproductive organ. In this diagram, you can see the longitudinal section of a flower. Now, we will discuss the male reproductive structure of a flower. Generally, the androecium is the third inner whorl of a flower. It is composed of stamens. Each stamen consists of a long and slender stalk called filament. And the terminal, generally bilobed structure is called the anther. Male gametes are produced in the pollen grains. The pollen grains develop in the anthers of the flower. The two lobes of the anther are connected with each other by a sterile tissue called the connective. Each anther has 4 microsporangia which contain the pollen grains or microspores. The stamens of a flower may be free or united. Now, let us see the female reproductive structure of a flower. The gynoecium or the pistil is the innermost whorl of a flower. It is the female reproductive part of the flower. The gynoecium is composed of carpels. Each carpel has 3 parts. They are ovary, style and stigma. The basal swollen part of the carpel is called the ovary. The long or short middle portion is the style and the terminal receptive structure is the stigma. The stigma serves as a landing platform for the pollen grains. The ovary bears ovules inside it. In this diagram, you can see the structure of a pistil. Female gametes are produced in the ovule. The ovule develops in the ovary of the flower. Now, let us see the development of male gametophyte. The pollen grains or microspores are produced within the anther of the stamen. A typical angiosperm anther is bilobed, with each lobe having two theca. That is why they are called dithecous. The development of pollen grain or microspore in the microsporangium of an anther is called microsporogenesis. A typical anther consists of 4 microsporangia. Let us understand the various types of tissues and their organization in the transverse section of an anther. In this diagram, we can see the transverse section of a young anther, an enlarged view of one microsporangium showing wall layers. The bilobed nature of an anther is very distinct in the transverse section of the anther. The anther is a 4-sided or tetragonal structure consisting of 4 microsporangia located at the corners, 2 microsporangia in each lobe. Here, I would like to mention that the microsporangia develop further and become pollen sacs. They extend longitudinally all through the length of an anther and are packed with pollen grains. In a transverse section of the structure of microsporangium, we can observe that a typical microsporangium appears near circular in outline. It is generally surrounded by 4 wall layers: the epidermis, endothecium, middle layers and the tapetum. The outer 3 wall layers perform the function of protection and help in dehiscence of anther to release the pollen. The innermost wall layer is the tapetum. It nourishes the developing pollen grains. Cells of the tapetum possess dense cytoplasm and generally have more than one nucleus. When the anther is young, a group of compactly arranged homogeneous cells called the sporogenous tissue occupies the center of each microsporangium. Now, let us understand the process of microsporogenesis. As the anther develops, the cells of the sporogenous tissue undergo meiotic divisions to form microspore tetrads. Each cell of the sporogenous tissue is capable of giving rise to a microspore tetrad. Each one is a potential pollen or microspore mother cell. The process of formation of microspores from a pollen mother cell through meiosis is called microsporogenesis. The sporogenous cells divide and give rise to the microspore mother cells. Microspore mother cells contain 2 sets of chromosomes and are therefore diploid, that is 2n in number. After formation, the microspores are arranged in a cluster of 4 cells called the microspore tetrad. As the anther mature and dehydrate, the microspores dissociate from each other and develop into pollen grains. Inside each microsporangium, several thousands of microspores or pollen grains are formed that are released with the dehiscence of anther. Here in this diagram, you can see a matured dehisced anther. You can observe mature pollen grains coming out of the openings of the mature dehisced anther. Now, let us discuss pollen grains. The pollen grains or microspores represent the male gametophytes. If you touch the open anthers of hibiscus or any other flower, you would find deposition of yellowish powdery pollen grains on your fingers. You can observe them by the help of a microscope. Pollen grains are found in a variety of architecture, sizes, shapes, colors, designs. It can be seen on the pollen grains from different species. Pollen grains are generally spherical, measuring about 25 to 50 micrometers in diameter. It has a prominent 2-layered wall. The hard outer layer, called the exine, is made up of sporopollenin, which is one of the most resistant organic material known on earth. It can withstand high temperatures and strong acids and alkali. No enzyme that degrades sporopollenin is so far known to us. At certain places, the exine is absent or very thin, giving an appearance of a pore. called the germ pore. Generally, there are 3 germ pores in dicots and 1 germ pore in monocots. The inner wall of the pollen grain is called the intine. It is a thin and continuous layer made up of cellulose and pectin. The cytoplasm or pollen grain is surrounded by a plasma membrane. When the pollen grain is mature, it contains 2 cells, the vegetative cell and the generative cell. Here we can see a mature pollen grain containing vegetative cell and generative cells. The vegetative cell is bigger, has abundant food reserve and a large irregularly shaped nucleus. The generative cell is small and floats in the cytoplasm of the vegetative cell. It is spindle shaped with dense cytoplasm and a nucleus. In over 60% of angiosperms, pollen grains are shed at 2-celled stage. In the remaining species, the generative cell divides mitotically to give rise to the 2 male gametes before pollen grains are shed, that is in the 3-celled stage. While the process of fertilization, which we will discuss in detail later on, when the pollen grains reaches the stigma, the intine grows out through a germ pore into a slender pollen tube. The generative cell divides into 2 male gametes. The process of development of male gametophyte from a pollen grain is called microgametogenesis. Life of the male gametophyte is very short as compared to that of the sporophyte. Friends, it is important to know that pollen grains of many species cause severe allergies and bronchial afflictions in some people, often leading to chronic respiratory disorders like asthma, bronchitis, etc. On the other hand, pollen grains are rich in nutrients. It has become a fashion in recent years to use pollen tablets as food supplements. In Western countries, a large number of pollen products in the form of tablets and syrups are available in the market. Pollen consumption has been claimed to increase the performance of athletes and racehorses. The study of pollen grains is called palynology. Here we can see some of the pollen products in this diagram. After shedding, the pollen grains have to land on the stigma before they lose viability, if they have to bring about fertilization. How long do you think the pollen grains retain viability? The period for which pollen grains remain viable is highly variable and to some extent depends on the prevailing temperature and humidity. In some cereals such as rice and wheat, pollen grains lose viability within 30 minutes of their release. And in some members of Rosaceae, Leguminosae and Solanaceae, they maintain viability for months. Friends, you may have heard of storing semen or sperms of many animals including humans for artificial insemination. It is possible to store pollen grains of a large number of species for years in liquid nitrogen on -196 degrees centigrade. Such stored pollen can be used as pollen banks similar to seed banks in crop breeding programs. So friends, now I have come to the end of the first part of this lesson on sexual reproduction of flowering plants. Today we have discussed the flower, its role as an organ of sexual reproduction in flowering plants. We have seen the reproductive parts of a flower, the stamen and the pistil. We have also covered the structure and development of microsporangia and the pollen grains along with their importance. In the next episode, we will focus on the female reproductive structures and will cover the structure and development of megasporangia or the ovule and the embryo sac. Here I will leave you some points for thinking. Why the exine of the pollen grain is too hard? What is cryopreservation? Why do we use this procedure? We will discuss these points in the next lecture. With this, I conclude this episode. Thank you. Hello dear students, I am Dr. Iram Khan from CIET NCERT. In the second part of the topic of sexual reproduction in flowering plants under the unit reproduction, we will cover the structure and development of the megasporangium or the ovule and the embryo sac along with its types. In the first part of this chapter, we have already discussed the flower as a reproductive structure of angiosperms, the male and female parts of the flower, the structure and development of microsporangia and the pollen grain, which represent the male reproductive part of the flower. We close the first episode with some points to think about. I am sure that you all must have thought about them. Let us discuss them first. The first point was why the exine of the pollen grain is too hard. The reason of this is that the exine, which is the outermost layer of the pollen grains, is made up of a complex substance called sporopollenin. This substance is one of the most hard material known to human beings. It is resistant to decay. That is why pollen grains are well preserved in fossils. No enzyme that can degrade sporopollenin is known to us. Now, a question appears that how can a pollen grain germinate with such a hard outer wall? The answer is that for this, pollen grain exine has prominent apertures called germ pores, where sporopollenin is absent. The germination takes place through these germ pores. Nature has made the exine so hard because in the process of pollination, the pollen grains have to travel a long distance and face various harsh situations. The hard outer covering helps to keep the germinal material safe before reaching its destination on the stigma. Now, let us take the next point which was posed for thinking. It was, what is cryopreservation? Why do we use this procedure? Students, cryopreservation is a process where cells, whole tissues or any other substances susceptible to damage caused by chemical reactivity or time are preserved by cooling to sub-zero temperatures. At low enough temperatures, any enzymatic or chemical activity which might cause damage to the material in question is effectively stopped. Cryopreservation is done at around -136 degrees centigrade to -196 degrees centigrade of temperature. The preserved substances through this process are used afterwards whenever required. So, dear students, now let us start with the next part of the topic, sexual reproduction in plants. First of all, let us discuss about the pistil. The gynoecium represents the female reproductive part of the flower. When the gynoecium consists of a single pistil or carpel, it is called monocarpellary. When it have more than one pistil or carpels, it is called multicarpellary. When there are more than one carpels, the pistils may be fused together and called as syncarpus, as shown in this diagram of the multicarpellary and syncarpus pistil of papaver. On the other hand, the multicarpellary pistil may be free and called as apocarpus, as shown in the diagram of multicarpellary and apocarpus gynoecium of Michela plant. Each pistil has three parts: the stigma, style and ovary. We can observe the pistil of a hibiscus flower in this diagram, where all the other floral parts are removed. In the pistil, the stigma serves as a landing platform for pollen grains. The style is the elongated slender part beneath the stigma. The basal bulged part of the pistil is the ovary. Inside the ovary is the ovarian cavity, which is also called the locule. The placenta is located inside the ovarian cavity. There are various types of placentation found in different species of plants. Arising from the placenta are the megasporangia, which are commonly called ovules. The number of ovules in an ovary may be 1, as found in wheat, paddy, mango, etc., and can be many, as found in papaya, watermelon, orchids, etc. Now, let us familiarize ourselves with the structure of a typical angiosperm ovule. The ovule is a small structure attached to the placenta by means of a stalk called funicle. The body of the ovule fuses with funicle in the region called hilum. Thus, Hilum represents the junction between ovule and funicle. Each ovule has one or two protective envelopes called integuments. The parenchymatous tissue inside the ovule is called the nucellus. Integuments encircle the nucellus except at the tip where a small opening called the micropyle is organized. Opposite the micropylar end is the chalaza, representing the basal part of the ovule. Cells of the nucellus have abundant reserve food material. The embryo sac or female gametophyte is located in the nucellus. An ovule generally has a single embryo sac formed from a megaspore through reduction division. So, students, as we have gone through the structure of the megaspore or the ovule, now let us discuss the process of megasporogenesis. The process of formation of megaspores from the megaspore mother cell is called megasporogenesis. Generally, ovules differentiate into a single megaspore mother cell in the micropylar region of the nucellus. It is a large cell containing dense cytoplasm and a prominent nucleus. The megaspore mother cell undergoes meiotic division. Meiosis results in the production of 4 megaspores. We can observe the parts of the ovule showing a large megaspore mother cell, a dyad and a tetrad of megaspore in these diagrams. Students, let us discuss about the female gametophyte. In a majority of flowering plants, out of the 4, one of the megaspore is functional, while the other 3 degenerate. Only the functional megaspore develops into the female gametophyte or the embryo sac. The method of embryo sac formation from a single megaspore is termed as monosporic development. Let us study the formation of the embryo sac in a little more detail. The nucleus of the functional megaspore divides mitotically to form 2 nuclei which move to the opposite poles, forming the 2 nucleate embryo sac. 2 more sequential mitotic nuclear divisions result in the formation of 4 nucleate and later the 8 nucleate stages of the embryo sac. The 2, 4 and 8 nucleate stages of embryo sac and a mature embryo sac can be observed in these diagrams. Students, it is interesting to note that these mitotic divisions are strictly free nuclear, which means nuclear divisions are not followed immediately by cell wall formation. After the 8 nucleate stage, cell walls are laid down, leading to the organization of the typical female gametophyte or embryo sac. The distribution of cells inside the embryo sac in the diagram of mature embryo sac. 6 of the 8 nuclei are surrounded by cell walls and organized into cells. The remaining 2 nuclei, called polar nuclei, are situated below the egg apparatus in the large central cell. There is a characteristic distribution of the cells within the embryo sac. 3 cells are grouped together at the micropylar end and constitute the egg apparatus. The egg apparatus in turn consists of 2 synergids and 1 egg cell. The synergids have special cellular thickenings at the micropylar tip called filiform apparatus, which play an important role in guiding the pollen tubes into the synergid. 3 cells are at the chalazal end and are called the antipodals. The large central cell has 2 polar nuclei, thus a typical angiosperm embryo sac at maturity, though 8 nucleate, is 7 celled. The 8 nucleate embryo sac development was first studied in Polygonum, hence it is also called Polygonum type embryo sac. Students, we can observe that at maturity the female gametophyte or embryo sac almost fills the ovule and the nucellus is almost used by the embryo sac. A fully developed embryo sac with the nucellus, integuments and funiculus together constitute the mature ovule. Now, let us see the types of embryo sac. Students, here we should mention the name of Dr. Panchanan Maheshwari, who is also considered as father of angiosperm embryology in India. He has classified the female gametophytes of flowering plants into 3 main types. This classification is on the basis of the number of megaspore nuclei taking part in the development. The types of embryo sacs are, first one is monosporic embryo sac, the second is bisporic embryo sac, and the third is tetrasporic embryo sac. So friends, with this we have come to the end of the second part of this lesson on sexual reproduction of flowering plants. Here we have discussed the structure and development of the megasporangium or the ovules and the embryo sac along with its types. In the next episode, we will focus on the process of pollination and its kinds, pollen-pistil interaction and artificial hybridization. The point for thinking for this part of the lesson is which part of the gynoecium develop into fruit and seeds. We will discuss this point in the next part of the program. With this, I conclude this episode. Hello dear students. In the third part of the topic of sexual reproduction in flowering plants under the unit reproduction, we will cover the process of pollination and its kinds, pollen-pistil interaction and artificial hybridization. In the second part of this chapter, we have already discussed the structure and development of the megasporangium or the ovule and the embryo sac along with its types in detail. We close the second episode with a point to think about. Let us discuss it first. The point was which part of the gynoecium develop into fruit and seeds. The answer is from the gynoecium the ovary develops into fruit and ovules develop into seeds. So dear students, now let us start with the next part of the topic sexual reproduction in plants. First of all, let us discuss about pollination. We have already learnt that the male and female gametes in flowering plants are produced in the pollen grain and embryo sac respectively. As both types of gametes are non-motile, they have to be brought together for fertilization. A question arises that how is this achieved? The answer is pollination. Pollination is the mechanism to achieve this objective. Transfer of pollen grains when they shed from the anther to the stigma of a pistil is termed pollination. Flowering plants have evolved an amazing array of adaptations to achieve pollination. They make use of external agents to achieve pollination. Let us see some of these types. Depending on the source of pollen, pollination can be divided into 3 types. The first type is autogamy. In this type, pollination is achieved within the same flower. Transfer of pollen grains take place from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. Here we can see an example of the self-pollinated flower. In a normal flower which opens and exposes the anthers and the stigma, complete autogamy is rare. Autogamy in such flowers require synchrony in pollen release and stigma receptivity, and also the anthers and the stigma should lie close to each other so that self-pollination can occur. Some plants such as viola or common pansy, oxalis and commelina produce 2 types of flowers. They are chasmogamous flowers and cleistogamous flowers. In this diagram, we can observe the cleistogamous and chasmogamous flowers. The chasmogamous flowers are similar to flowers of other species with exposed anthers and stigma. On the other hand, cleistogamous flowers do not open at all. In such flowers, the anthers and stigma lie close to each other. When anthers dehisce in the flower buds, pollen grains come in contact with the stigma to effect pollination. Thus, cleistogamous flowers are invariably autogamous, as there is no chance of cross-pollination landing on the stigma. Cleistogamous flowers produce assured seed set even in the absence of pollinators. Now, let us see the second kind of pollination. This is geitonogamy. Here, transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of other flower of the same plant happens. Although geitonogamy is functionally cross-pollination involving a pollinating agent, genetically it is similar to autogamy since the pollen grains come from the same plant. Now, let us see the third kind of pollination. It is xenogamy. Here, transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of a different plant happens. This is the only type of pollination which during pollination brings genetically different types of pollen grains to the stigma. We can observe a cross-pollinated flower in this photograph. Now, let us discuss the agents of pollination. Plants use wind and water as abiotic and animals as biotic agents to achieve pollination. Majority of plants use biotic agents for pollination. Only a small proportion of plants use abiotic agents. Pollen grains coming in contact with the stigma is a chance factor in both wind and water pollination. To compensate for these uncertainties and associated loss of pollen grains, the flower produces enormous amount of pollen when compared to the number of ovules available for pollination. Pollination by wind is more common among abiotic pollinations. Wind pollination also requires that the pollen grains are light and non-sticky so that they can be transported in wind currents. They often possess well-exposed stamens so that the pollens are easily dispersed into wind currents and large, often feathery stigma to easily trap airborne pollen grains. Here in this diagram, we can observe a wind-pollinated plant showing compact inflorescence and well-exposed stamens. Wind-pollinated flowers often have a single ovule in each ovary and numerous flowers packed into an inflorescence. A familiar example is the corn cob. The tassels you see are nothing but the stigma and style which wave in the wind to trap pollen grains. Wind pollination is quite common in grasses. Pollination by water is quite rare in flowering plants and is limited to about 30 genera, mostly monocotyledons. As against this, you would recall that water is a regular mode of transport for the male gametes among the lower plant groups such as algae, bryophytes and pteridophytes. It is believed, particularly for some bryophytes and pteridophytes, that their distribution is limited because of the need for water for the transport of male gametes and fertilization. Some examples of water pollinated plants are Vallisneria and Hydrilla, which grow in fresh water, and several marine sea grasses such as Zostera. It is important to know that all aquatic plants do not use water for pollination. In a majority of aquatic plants such as water hyacinth and water lily, the flowers emerge above the level of water and are pollinated by insects or wind as in most of the land plants. In Vallisneria, the female flower reach the surface of water by the long stalk and the male flowers or pollen grains are released onto the surface of water. They are carried passively by water currents. Some of them eventually reach the female flower and the stigma. We can observe pollination by water in Vallisneria in this diagram. In another group of water pollinated plants such as sea grasses, female flowers remain submerged in water and the pollen grains are released inside the water. Pollen grains in many such species are long, ribbon-like, and they are carried passively inside the water. Some of them reach the stigma and achieve pollination. In most of the water pollinated species, pollen grains are protected from wetting by a mucilaginous covering. Both wind and water pollinated flowers are not very colorful and do not produce nectar. Majority of flowering plants use a range of animals as pollinating agents: bees, butterflies, flies, beetles, wasps, ants, moths, birds like sunbirds and hummingbirds, and bats are the common pollinating agents. Here in this photograph we can observe an insect pollinating a flower. Among the animals, insects, particularly bees, are the dominant biotic pollinating agents. Even larger animals such as some primates like lemurs, arboreal or tree dwelling rodents, or even reptiles like gecko lizard and garden lizard have also been reported as pollinators in some species. Often flowers of animal pollinated plants are specifically adapted for a particular species of animal. Majority of insect pollinated flowers are large, colorful, fragrant and rich in nectar. When the flowers are small, a number of flowers are clustered into an inflorescence to make them conspicuous. Animals are attracted to flowers by color or fragrance or both. The flowers pollinated by flies and beetles secrete foul odors to attract these animals. To sustain animal visits, the flowers have to provide rewards to the animals. Nectar and pollen grains are the useful floral rewards. For harvesting the rewards from the flower, the animal visitor comes in contact with the anthers and the stigma. The body of the animal gets a coating of pollen grains, which are generally sticky in animal pollinated flowers. When the animal carrying pollen on its body comes in contact with the stigma, it brings about pollination. In some species, floral rewards are in providing safe place to lay eggs. For example, the tallest flower of Amorphophallus, the flower itself is about 6 feet in height. A similar relationship exists between a species of moth and the plant Yucca, where both species, moth and the plant, cannot complete their life cycles without each other. The moth deposits its eggs in the locule of the ovary and the flower in turn gets pollinated by the moth. The larva of the moth comes out of the eggs as the seed starts developing. Students, you can observe some flowers of the flowering plants or any other available to you like cucumber, mango, peepal, coriander, papaya, onion, lobia, cotton, tobacco, rose, lemon, eucalyptus, banana, etc. Try to find out which animals visit them and whether they could be pollinators. You will have to patiently observe the flowers over a few days and at different times of the day. You could also try to see whether there is any correlation in the characteristics of a flower to the animal that visits it. Carefully observe if any of the visitors come in contact with the anthers and the stigma, as only such visitors can bring about pollination. Many insects may consume pollen or the nectar without bringing about pollination. Such floral visitors are referred to as pollen or nectar robbers. Students, now let us discuss outbreeding devices. Majority of flowering plants produce hermaphrodite flowers and pollen grains are likely to come in contact with the stigma of the same flower. Continued self-pollination result in inbreeding depression. Flowering plants have developed many devices to discourage self-pollination and to encourage cross-pollination. In some species, pollen release and stigma receptivity are not synchronized. Either the pollen is released before the stigma becomes receptive, or stigma becomes receptive much before the release of pollen. In some other species, the anther and stigma are placed at different positions so that the pollen cannot come in contact with the stigma of the same flower. Both these devices prevent autogamy. The third device to prevent inbreeding is self-incompatibility. This is a genetic mechanism and prevents self-pollen, which means pollen from the same flower or other flowers of the same plant from fertilizing the ovules by inhibiting pollen germination or pollen tube growth in the pistil. Another device to prevent self-pollination is the production of unisexual flowers. If both male and female flowers are present on the same plant, such as castor and maize, which is monoecious, it prevents autogamy but not geitonogamy. In several species such as papaya, male and female flowers are present on different plants. That is, each plant is either male or female. This condition prevents both autogamy and geitonogamy. Students, let us discuss that what is pollen-pistil interaction. Pollination does not guarantee the transfer of the right type of pollen. Often, pollen of the wrong type, either from other species or self-incompatible pollen from the same plant, also land on the stigma. The pistil has the ability to recognize the pollen, whether it is the right type or compatible, or the wrong type or incompatible. If it is of the right type, the pistil accepts the pollen and promotes post-pollination events that leads to fertilization. If the pollen is of the wrong type, the pistil rejects the pollen by preventing pollen germination on the stigma or the pollen tube growth in the style. The ability of the pistil to recognize the pollen followed by its acceptance or rejection is the result of continuous dialogue between pollen grain and the pistil. This dialogue is mediated by chemical components of the pollen interacting with those of the pistil. It is only in recent years that botanists have been able to identify some of the pollen and pistil components and the interactions leading to the recognition followed by acceptance or rejection. As mentioned earlier, following compatible pollination, the pollen grain germinates on the stigma to produce a pollen tube through one of the germ pores. In this diagram, we can observe the pollen grains germinating on the stigma. The contents of the pollen grain move into the pollen tube. Pollen tube grows through the tissue of stigma and style and reaches the ovary. We can observe the pollen tubes growing through the style in this diagram. The next diagram shows the longitudinal section of pistil showing the path of the pollen tube growth. Students, you would recall that in some plants, pollen grains are shed at two-celled condition with a vegetative cell and a generative cell. In such plants, the generative cell divides and forms the two male gametes during the growth of pollen tube in the stigma. In plants which shed pollen in the three-celled condition, pollen tubes carry the two male gametes from the beginning. Pollen tube, after reaching the ovary, enters the ovule through the micropyle and then enters one of the synergids through the filiform apparatus. In this diagram, you can observe an enlarged view of an egg apparatus showing entry of pollen tube into a synergid. The next diagram shows discharge of male gametes into a synergid and the movements of the sperms, one into the egg and the other into the central cell. Many recent studies have shown that filiform apparatus present at the micropylar part of the synergids guide the entry of pollen tube. All these events from pollen deposition on the stigma until pollen tubes enter the ovule are together referred as pollen-pistil interaction. As pointed out earlier, pollen-pistil interaction is a dynamic process involving pollen recognition followed by promotion or inhibition of the pollen. The knowledge gained in this area would help the plant breeders in manipulating pollen pistil interaction, even in incompatible pollinations, to get desired hybrids. It is important to know that a plant breeder is interested in crossing different species and often genera to combine desirable characters to produce commercially superior varieties. Dear students, we are now reached at the last point of this part of this lecture, which is artificial hybridization. Artificial hybridization is one of the major approaches of crop improvement programs. In such crossing experiments, it is important to make sure that only the desired pollen grains are used for pollination and the stigma is protected from contamination from unwanted pollen. This is achieved by emasculation and bagging techniques. If the female parent bears bisexual flowers, removal of anthers from the flower buds before the anther dehisces using a pair of forceps is necessary. This step is referred to as emasculation. Emasculated flowers have to be covered with a bag of suitable size, generally made up of butter paper, to prevent contamination of its stigma with unwanted pollen. This process is called bagging. When the stigma of bagged flower attains receptivity, mature pollen grains collected from anthers of the male parent are dusted on the stigma and the flowers are rebagged and the fruits are allowed to develop. If the female parent produces unisexual flowers, there is no need for emasculation. The female flower buds are bagged before the flower open. When the stigma becomes receptive, pollination is carried out using the desired pollen and the flower rebagged. So students, with this we have come to an end of the third part of this lesson on sexual reproduction of flowering plants. Here we have discussed the process of pollination and its kinds, pollen pistil interaction and artificial hybridization. In the next episode, we will focus on double fertilization and post fertilization structures and events like endosperm and embryo development, formation of seeds in the fruits, parthenocarpic fruits and the process of apomixis and polyembryony. The point for thinking for this part of the lesson is, what is vivipary in plants? We will discuss this point in the next part of the program. Hello dear students. In the fourth and final part of the topic of sexual reproduction in flowering plants under the unit reproduction, we will cover double fertilization, post fertilization structures and events like development of endosperm and embryo, formation of seeds in the fruits, parthenocarpic fruits and the process of apomixis and polyembryony. In the third part of this chapter, we have already discussed the process of pollination and its kinds, pollen pistil interaction and artificial hybridization. We close the third episode with a point to think about. Let us discuss it first. The point was, what is vivipary in plants? The answer is that in plants, vivipary is the condition where the embryo or the young plant within the seed grows first to break through the seed coat, then out of the fruit wall, while still attached to the parent plant. This condition is commonly found in mangroves, which grow in saline coastal sediment habitats. So dear students, now let us start with the next part of the topic, sexual reproduction in plants. Now let us discuss the process of double fertilization. After entering one of the synergids, the pollen tube releases the two male gametes into the cytoplasm of the synergid. One of the male gametes moves towards the egg cell and fuses with the nucleus, in this way completing the syngamy. This results in the formation of a diploid cell, the zygote. The other male gamete moves towards the two polar nuclei located in the central cell
and fuses with them to produce a triploid primary endosperm nucleus. You can observe a fertilized embryo sac showing zygote and primary endosperm nucleus in this diagram. Students, because this process of producing a triploid primary endosperm nucleus involves the fusion of 3 haploid nuclei, it is termed triple fusion. Since 2 types of fusions, syngamy and triple fusion, take place in an embryo sac, the phenomenon is termed as double fertilization, an event unique to flowering plants. The central cell after triple fusion becomes the primary endosperm cell and develops into the endosperm, while the zygote develops into an embryo. The next point for discussion is post-fertilization, structures and events. Students, after double fertilization, events of endosperm and embryo development, maturation of ovules into seeds and ovary into fruit are collectively termed as post-fertilization events. First, let us discuss the development of the endosperm. Endosperm development happens before the embryo development. The primary endosperm cell divides repeatedly and forms a triploid endosperm tissue. The cells of this tissue are filled with reserve food materials and are used for the nutrition of the developing embryo. In the most common type of endosperm development, the primary endosperm nucleus undergoes successive nuclear divisions to give rise to free nuclei. This stage of endosperm development is called free nuclear endosperm. Subsequently, cell wall formation occurs and the endosperm becomes cellular. The number of free nuclei formed before cellularization varies greatly. Dear students, the coconut water from tender coconut that you are familiar with is an example of free nuclear endosperm, which is made up of thousands of nuclei, and the surrounding white kernel is the cellular endosperm. Endosperm may either be completely consumed by the developing embryo, as it is found in pea, groundnut, beans, etc., before seed maturation, or it may persist in the mature seeds as found in castor and coconut and be used up during seed germination. Students, for having a better idea, you can split open some seeds of castor, peas, beans, groundnut, fruit of coconut, and you can look for endosperm in each case. Find out whether the endosperm is persistent in cereals like wheat, rice and maize or not. Now, let us discuss the embryo. Embryo develops at the micropylar end of the embryo sac, where the zygote is situated. Most zygotes divide only after certain amount of endosperm is formed. This is an adaptation to provide assured nutrition to the developing embryo. Though the seeds differ greatly, the early stages of embryo development, which is called embryogeny, are similar in both monocotyledons and dicotyledons. Here in this figure, you can observe the stages of embryogeny in a dicotyledonous embryo. The zygote gives rise to the proembryo and subsequently to the globular, heart-shaped and mature embryo. A typical dicotyledonous embryo, which is shown in this diagram, consists of an embryonal axis and 2 cotyledons. The portion of embryonal axis above the level of cotyledons is the epicotyle, which terminates with the plumule or stem tip. The cylindrical portion below the level of cotyledons is hypocotyle, that terminates at its lower end in the radicle or root tip. The root tip is covered with a root cap. Embryos of monocotyledons possess only one cotyledon. You can observe this in the longitudinal section of an embryo of grass in this diagram. In the grass family, the cotyledons is called scutellum, that is situated towards the lateral side of the embryonal axis. At its lower end, the embryonal axis has the radicle and root cap enclosed in an undifferentiated sheath called chlorhiza. The portion of the embryonal axis above the level of attachment of scutellum is the epicotyle. Epicotyle has a shoot apex and a few leaf primordia enclosed in a hollow foliar structure which is called the cleoptile. Dear students, you can observe the various parts of the embryo and the seed by soaking a few seeds of wheat, maize, peas, chickpeas, groundnut, etc. in water overnight and then split them open, and you can observe these seeds. Now, let us discuss about the seed. In angiosperms, the seed is the final product of sexual reproduction. It is often described as a fertilized ovule. Seeds are formed inside the fruits. A seed typically consists of seed coats, cotyledons, and an embryo axis. The cotyledons of the embryo are simple structures, generally thick and swollen due to storage of food reserves as found in legumes. Mature seeds may be non-albuminous or albuminous. We can observe the structure of some seeds in these diagrams. The non-albuminous seeds have no residual endosperm as it is completely consumed during embryo development, like in pea, groundnut, sunflower, etc. Albuminous seeds retain a part of endosperm as it is not completely used up during embryo development, like in wheat, maize, barley, castor, etc. Occasionally, in some seeds such as black pepper and beet, remnants of nucellus are also persistent. This residual persistent nucellus is the perisperm. Integuments of ovules hardens as tough protective seed coats. The micropyle remains as a small pore in the seed coat. This facilitates entry of oxygen and water into the seed during germination. As the seed matures, its water content is reduced and seeds become relatively dry with only 10 to 15% moisture by mass. The general metabolic activity of the embryo slows down. The embryo may enter a state of inactivity called dormancy. If favorable conditions are available, which may be adequate moisture, oxygen and suitable temperature, they germinate. Dear students, as ovule mature into seeds, the ovary develops into a fruit, which means the transformation of ovules into seeds and ovary into fruit proceeds simultaneously. The wall of the ovary develops into the wall of fruit called the pericarp. The fruits may be fleshy as in guava, orange, mango, etc., or may be dry as in groundnut and mustard, etc. Many fruits have evolved mechanisms for dispersal of seeds. In most plants, by the time the fruit develops from the ovary, other floral parts degenerate and fall off. However, in a few species such as apple, strawberry, cashew, etc., the thalamus also contribute to fruit formation. Such fruits are called false fruits. We can observe the sections of false fruit of apple and strawberry in this diagram. Most fruits, however, develop only from the ovary and are called true fruits. Although in most of the species, fruits are the result of fertilization, but there are few species in which fruits develop without fertilization. Such fruits are called parthenocarpic fruits. Banana is one such example. Parthenocarpy can be induced through the application of growth hormones, and the fruits developed by parthenocarpy are seedless. Seeds offer several advantages to angiosperms. Firstly, since reproductive processes such as pollination and fertilization are independent of water, seed formation is more dependable. Also, seeds have better adaptive strategies for dispersal to new habitats and help the species to colonize in other areas. As seeds have sufficient food reserves, young seedlings are nourished until they are capable of photosynthesis on their own. The hard seed coat provides protection to the young embryo. Being products of sexual reproduction, they generate new genetic combinations leading to variations. Dear students, seed is the basis of our agriculture. Dehydration and dormancy of mature seeds are crucial for storage of seeds, which can be used as food throughout the year and also to raise crop in the next season. The period of the seeds remaining alive after dispersal varies greatly. In a few species, the seeds lose viability within a few months. Seeds of a large number of species live for several years. Some seeds can remain alive for hundreds of years. Students, finally let us discuss apomixis and polyembryony. Although seeds in general are the products of fertilization, a few flowering plants such as some species of Asteraceae and grasses have evolved a special mechanism to produce seeds without fertilization. This process is called apomixis. Thus, apomixis is a form of asexual reproduction that mimics sexual reproduction. Students, in some species, the diploid egg cell is formed without reduction division and develops into the embryo without fertilization. More often, as in many citrus and mango varieties, some of the nucellar cells surrounding the embryo sac start dividing, protrude into the embryo sac and develop into the embryos. In such species, each ovule contains many embryos. Occurrence of more than one embryo in a seed is referred as polyembryony. Hybrid varieties of several of our food and vegetable crops are being extensively cultivated. Cultivation of hybrids has tremendously increased productivity. One of the problems of hybrids is that hybrid seeds have to be produced every year. If the seeds collected from hybrids are sown, the plants in the progeny will segregate and do not maintain hybrid characters. Production of hybrid seed is costly and hence the cost of hybrid seeds become too expensive for the farmers. If these hybrids are made into apomicts, there is no segregation of characters in the hybrid progeny. Then the farmers can keep on using the hybrid seeds to raise new crop year after year, and he does not have to buy hybrid seeds every year. Because of the importance of apomixis in hybrid seed industry, active research is going on in many laboratories around the world to understand the genetics of apomixis and to transfer apomictic genes into hybrid varieties. Dear students, now we have come to an end of this chapter on sexual reproduction in plants. In the first part of this topic, we have discussed about flower as a reproductive structure of angiosperms, the male and female parts of the flower, the structure and development of microsporangia and the pollen grain. The second part has covered the structure and development of the megasporangium or the ovule and the embryo sac along with its types. The third part covered the detailed account of pollination, its kinds, pollen pistil interaction and artificial hybridization. Finally, the last part covered double fertilization and post-fertilization structures and events like endosperm and embryo development, formation of seeds in the fruits, parthenocarpic fruits and the process of apomixis and polyembryony. With this, we conclude this lesson. Wish you all the best. Thank you.